Imperial Lounge presents a night called
Reggae Dancehall by the Beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae Dancehall by the Beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
It's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like Malcolm. 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ, or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday, or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, duplets and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way. Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life chat like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
You see, it's here. You see. New feature coming from World Jam Global Radio in 2018. World Jam Global Top 10. To vote for your favorite artist, go to twitter.com/World Jam Global or facebook.com/World Jam Global. So pick the right track where you want to have in your car, at your house, a rock. At them.
I want to say a big good evening going out to each and every single one of you out there tonight.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
As I continue to share this live stream right across the world, I want you to get ready for another explosive interview right here on World Jam Global Radio.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Alongside my co-host today, Jerry Summers, author and ex-Idaho Chief of Police.
I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish.
We have Stephanie Babb,
My lessons in the street.
sister of Captain Brian Babb,
I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet.
whose life was tragically cut short
I was all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Nothing to
by trigger-happy cops with no understanding.
I'm a changed man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about beat no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell.
You can get us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com live right now.
Already did my time. I paid.
You can follow us on Facebook Live.
Already did my time. I paid
on Issues Today.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
And all other social media platforms.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chum. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going
So to say, we're going live to Wayne Anderson, Sandra Dawn, Laurie Barbara Radcliffe, Jeff Thomas Black, and all the listeners going right across the world. It's Kirvin Julian live on World Jam Global Radio.
Pay for my crime.
It's Issues Today.
Already did my time. Already did my time. Pay for my crime. Already did my.
And we're talking about the life of Captain Brian Babb. A war veteran that deserved better, a captain of his country's army that was badly let down, and a man that is missed and was greatly loved by his family. We're going to be talking about the circumstances that led to his death, and we're going to try to help his family get to grips with their loss. Co-hosting today is Jerry Summers, author and former Idaho Chief of Police, with a very great insight into policing policy.
And very quick on my feet, I was swimming in women. I had girls.
We're live on World Jam Global Radio, going out right across the world.
Nothing's changed, the whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster.
And you're just moments away
in jail, trying to
from another exclusive story on World Jam Global Radio.
My time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my.
You got questions?
My crime.
You got points you want to make? Please use the comments.
My time. I paid for my crime.
You can get us into the chat room on www.worldjamglobalradio.com, or you can find me, Kirvin Julian, on Facebook.
I was a drug dealer.
Or Issues Today on Facebook.
But I never got high on my own supply.
Or all the other police brutality located sites.
I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all
right across the world.
Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb.
We've been doing these shows now for nearly 4 years.
But I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common.
And I'm still as passionate today as I was then.
Then Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator.
We saw recently how a young black man right here in London town was surrounded by over 10 to 15 police officers.
For my crime.
But it's nothing like what they go through in America daily, where people's lives are brought to a sad and sudden end. I want to say a big thank you to all our supporters, contributors, and those who allow us to share our streams live on their pages across the world. Please go on my page, it's now public. You will be able to share this live stream on any page you choose, because I've allowed you to do so. So take up the last couple of minutes we've got before we go live. Share this out, make sure it goes to as many pages and places as it can.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. All those drive-by killings, stop them. It ain't about nothing. He who was out sin, let him cast the first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide, and put down those knives. Stop stabbing each other. Yeah.
Going live, we're just moments away. Okay, here we go. I think we're going to go live now, and I'm hoping that my guests are going to be on the other end. I think we've had one or two technical problems, but we're going to go and try and get through it now. I'm hoping to have former chief of police and author from Idaho, Jerry Summers. Are you there, Jerry? Hello, Jerry. Hello, Jerry. Hello, Jerry. Can you hear me, Stephanie?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you clearly. I'm not sure why we can't hear Jerry. Hi, Jerry. Okay, we're just going to carry on. Stephanie, just introduce yourself. Tell the audience who you are.
Hi. Yeah.
Go on.
All right. My name is Stephanie Babb. I'm from Eugene, Oregon. And I'm on this show primarily to talk about my brother, Captain Brian Babb, who was shot and killed by Eugene police 3 years ago.
Carry on a minute. I'm just trying to send Jerry a message.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So
just tell us where are you from? Where are you from? Tell us a bit more about you, Steph.
About me personally? Okay. All right. Well, I am from Eugene, Oregon. And if any of you are familiar with this place, it's not huge, but it's not small. It's a university town, home of Nike, consequently. And we grew up, my brother and I, with horses. And my brother rodeoed. My whole family still rides horses. Yeah, I'm trying to come up with this now that you're trying to get Jerry.
No, that's fine. I can see Jerry's mic was muted. That was the problem. I can see now.
Oh no!
And I should imagine Jerry is now here.
I mean, I didn't know I was going to talk about myself. That makes it a whole different thing.
No, that's fine. I was just getting you to talk for a while I tried to send a couple of messages to Jerry. But Jerry, your mic is unmuted now. You should be able to hear us. Hello, Jerry. He still can't hear us, but his mic was.
Oh.
Okay. You carry on for a little bit.
I will carry on for a little bit. Yeah, like I said, it's harder to talk about myself. It's a lot easier. In fact, my brother would die right now if he knew I was talking about him, but that's already been done. So, yeah, I actually got a hold of Curvin about this after the Kaepernick thing. I don't even know if I pronounced that right. Kaepernick.
Yeah.
And the Nike situation here in Eugene. I just thought it was ironic that my brother, a veteran, was killed by police, and it wasn't brought up. And there was a lot of controversy. There still is, obviously, about that. And I'm in full support of Kaepernick taking a knee. That's my whole take on that is that's what my brother fought for. So, but that's why I got a hold of Curvin in the first place. And I was fortunate enough to even know about you, Curvin, through Yolanda and just a series of from posts. And now if they're listening to this and I get somebody's name wrong or affiliated with the wrong organization, please don't take it personally. I'm still just getting to know everybody. And now that I've been kind of hooked up with people across the United States, I get confused about who goes with what. It does not take away from your importance by any means, but just so you guys know, that's where I'm at with that. And in fact, it's kind of interesting because all the work that we were doing here locally in Eugene, trying to get the word out create awareness, work on Brian's bill and everything. I didn't know there was so many other murders, killings, even in Portland, which is, an hour and a half away from me, because the media doesn't want people to know, and they get their information from the police, and they don't want those lines of communication shut down. So it's an interesting system, but even after 3 years, we just found out how just tapped into this whole national movement, of people have been killed by police and the family members who've decided to do something about it.
The thing is, Steph, before you got in, before your brother was killed, and we're going to talk a lot about that in a minute as I continue to do some work to try and get Jerry involved, because he's desperately trying to make this work.
Oh, no. Yeah. I hope he does.
Yeah, so do I. He has so much insight to bring to this. But before your brother was killed and you had to get on this journey of truth, did you have an understanding of the problems that were going on within policing in America, full stop, as to the amount of people that were killed by police?
That's a damn good question. And just a short answer is no. I had no idea. None. I mean, I knew Black Lives Matter. I knew about that because that's, a huge movement. It's so important. But coming from my town of Eugene, that's predominantly white, middle class, like I said, it's a university town. I know everybody's shocked when they have a family member killed, but I think I felt like I was really, now I wouldn't have used the word privileged because I didn't know any better, but I was insulated from that. And now that it's happened to my family, for me, it's so important to get it out, because if it can happen to my family, it can happen to any family, regardless of what color you are or where you come from. And that's what's so scary to me is it's so out there. But in my town and about police, I wouldn't have had any idea. I mean, I still had this trust in police that's been shattered, and I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to know. It wasn't part of my life. It didn't touch my circle, and so it's a lot easier just to assume that, hey, you don't want to get caught speeding, but Jesus, now if you get caught speeding, especially if you're of color, you could get killed. It's that prevalent. It's that simple, and that's what I want people to know. Oh, I get emotional.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead and get emotional. I want you to get emotional. It's important that we show some passion about the things that really matter to us around here, so that people can get a real understanding, engage the depth of, emotional roller coastering that we go through. But you spoke about you were aware of Black Lives Matter, for example. But what was your take on Black Lives Matter when you first heard it? Did you think it was just people going on about stuff and it wasn't as bad as some people are making out?
It didn't have anything to do with me. I'm white, and, my family's white and most of my friends are white, just because that's what Eugene is mostly made up of, And so it was like, yes, I understood and I listened and I was sympathetic, but and I really hadn't even thought far enough into it to say, in regards to like police brutality and Black people and doing that whole thing. And I, thought it was bigger cities and stuff. And no, it's not. It's absolutely unequivocally everywhere we go, anywhere you live, it's there. And it's permeated we're indoctrinated into this way of thinking in our society. And so even if you don't think you're being affected by it, you are. And until it's really in your face and you're identifying with it, you have no idea. And that's what happened with me. And like I said, we didn't know anybody until I got hooked up with Pacific Northwest Family Circle up in Portland. And they're just, oh my gosh, they're a wonderful organization that helps families and against police brutality. And they're especially sensitive to Black Lives Matter. And I've been learning an enormous amount from them. When I first heard about them, and let me back up for a second, because this is really interesting. So I had been doing all this work, and I have a huge family, and they've all been involved. And we talked about Brian's bill right after my brother was killed, thinking, we really need to do something about police reform and getting veterans involved through the VA to respond to veterans in distress, because we were told by the DA that the reason that they came at my brother the way they did is because he was a veteran and had access to firearms, to weapons. So I thought I was on the cutting edge. I thought I was doing something all new and, amazing. And yet it wasn't going anywhere. And, this is a pretty secular place. It's, it just wasn't going anywhere. And I was frustrated. My niece and nephew have a lawsuit going on against the city of Eugene, but I'm not a part of that. So, I've been working on this, just plugging along, and I knew it was going to be the long haul. I finally gave myself a break, and I thought, you know what? I am tired of beating my head against the wall about this. I'm not getting anywhere, and I'm not going to guilt myself about this anymore. I'm not going to beat myself up about this. I'm going to let it go, and if it's meant to be, the universe is going to come back and hand it to me. And this is crazy. This is so crazy, but I literally said, okay, and kind of put my hands up, and I was by myself, and I felt relief, like, okay, we're going to move on from here. And I walked upstairs and I turned on the TV. Okay. I turned on the TV, and immediately on was the video of John Ella Fritz being shot in Portland. And, you hear the commotion, the video of these cops in Portland chase this guy down. He had a knife to his own neck. They had dogs. There were a ton of them in a room, and they shot him. And he was across the room. He had a knife to himself. He was in distress, and they shot him. Well, what got me is his brother said, why didn't they subdue him with sponge bullets? And it's the same question I've asked myself 1,000 times. My cousin and I, we joke about it. Why didn't they use like blow darts? Anything. They had all this access to different ways of dealing with this. Why did it have to be fatal? Why did they have to take that extra step? It's
the great news is the great news, Steph. The great news is that Jerry Summers has managed to get himself back into the group and into the chat, and he's here with us. And I think just as a quick introduction, before we move on and start talking about your brother, I'm glad that you've touched on this subject, because maybe we can get Jerry to just come in here, part as an introduction and part to answer that question, because for me, I feel the same thing. You've got a guy who's standing in a corner with a knife to his own throat. This is a man that's trying to take his own life. And we understand the principle that police open fire when they're in fear of their own lives. But when somebody's trying to take their own life, you don't make it easier by killing them, right? And surely
it defeats the purpose. It makes no sense. It just doesn't make sense.
They've just executed him. So maybe we can get Jerry to just come in here for a minute and explain, what does he feel should have happened? Is that the policy? Is that what an officer is expected to do? Or is there another procedure that should have taken place at that time? And if that procedure didn't take place, Where are the consequences and why wasn't there any? A lot of questions, Jerry, but you've been off the line trying to get on for a while, so I'm throwing them all at you. Catch.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having me, and it's just an honor to be here. I've gotten part of the conversation because technology is great when it works, but when it doesn't work, it creates problems. So I haven't really heard a lot of the discussion. But let me answer the question with regard to an individual without knowing the circumstances of the case that Stephanie was referring to. Let's just say you have an individual in a room with a knife to his throat and you have multiple officers there. The best thing you can do for an individual at that point is to back off and try to calm them down. The problem is, if from an officer's standpoint, if somebody has a knife and they're within 21 feet of you, they are a lethal threat. And they can, with somebody with a mental health issue, can respond and can switch on you in a nanosecond. So there are two situations there. One, I'm not going to defend all police officers and all police departments because some of them handle people with mental health issues absolutely incorrectly, and there's no way around that. But there's also an inherent threat, whether you have a knife or whether you have a gun. The officers don't know what your intent is, and we go to action versus reaction, and action is always faster than your reaction. The problem you have in the circumstance that Stephanie defined is they had multiple officers there, they had dogs, and there are ways of subduing people. There's less lethal shotgun rounds, there's tasers, there's all of those things that can come into play. And why they didn't use it, I don't know, and I would question highly why they didn't use another alternative other than just to shoot him and kill him. When you have somebody in mental stress, you have to deal with them differently than you would with somebody who's threatening you with a knife.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me, Jerry, and you'd have imagined police officers going into a place where somebody was threatening their own life in an unstable, and they were unstable. It's quite clear that they're unstable. You're quite right. What they should have done is step back, step out, and ask for additional support of de-escalation and negotiation. Somebody that could talk to this guy, somebody who could connect with this guy, and try and bring him round and try and work out what was going on for him and why was he in such distress and what could we do to take away that stress right now that would make him want to live rather than die. Somebody that would want to communicate with this guy and make this guy realize that maybe living is far better off than dying right now, and not everything is going to be as bad as he thinks it is, and by the time he wakes up tomorrow morning he's going to be glad that he didn't end his life because better will come. There's somebody that's going to go in there and try and talk this guy back to life.
Can I pop in here for a second?
Absolutely, Steph.
Okay, so I will tell you why they don't do that. It's because of time management, and two, because they can get away with it. It's a matter of eliminating the problem and moving on. And they don't have a regard. Personally, I don't think they have a regard for the people that they're so-called serving. And that's my opinion, but that's how I feel about it.
So let me respond to that, Kervin. Let me respond to that a little bit. The officers are, and please understand, I'm not defending all officers. There are plenty of officers that are doing things incorrectly, that are escalating rather de-escalating the problem. The problem from an officer's perspective is you're standing face to face with somebody that's got a knife to their throat. If you don't handle it correctly and they actually kill themselves in front of you, then the general public's going to say you should have done something to prevent that. And then if you do something and the person winds up being killed or killing themselves, then you created the problem. So you're in a no-win situation. The problem is that the training within the law enforcement community is not sufficient for them to be handling the situation they're handling. I don't believe.
Which is ironic because that's what they do, is they deal with, most people have mental illnesses that they're dealing with. So to me, it just makes no sense that, they wouldn't have that training, but that's what we're faced with in America, is they don't.
But Stephanie, a mental illness has the same symptomology as somebody who's on hallucinogens or some type of drug or who's schizophrenic. You're asking an officer to be able to diagnose all of that. The biggest issue there is the officer needs to know how to de-escalate and not escalate the situation. The worst thing you can do is
toward the same thing.
Yeah, well, 1 second, guys, 1 second. 9 times out of 10, Jerry, is it a fair comment, right, that 9 times out of 10, the officers responding to a home where there's somebody's struggling with mental health related issues are aware that that person has a mental health related issue?
The majority of the time, yes, I would say so, because I think most of the time the caller tells you that they have a mental health issue.
So then therefore, trying to work out whether this is drug induced or mental health becomes redundant because they know it's a mental health related issue.
Well, they can be both at the same time, though.
Could be both.
But if they have a system of dealing with it, it would address both issues anyway. So that's what I think.
I do understand where Jerry's coming from because both symptoms can display similar and parallel behaviors, which means that unless you actually know what you're facing or what you're dealing with, it could be difficult to differentiate which one it is. But the question that we're asking is, in the knowledge that the officer who is responding or the officers that are responding are aware that they're dealing with somebody who has a mental health related issue, whether they are under the influence or not. The primary key factor here is that this individual has a mental health related issue. And that's the approach. The drug issue is secondary because that will wear off. That will wear off unless they're continuing to take the drug of choice.
That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah,
but the mental health is permanent. That's something that won't wear off unless they get medication and they get immediate help. Right? So the one that the thing that should be challenging is the mental health. The thing that they should be trying to deal with is the mental health. The drug issue is redundant in that situation, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think it really kind of matters whether it's a mental health issue or if it's a substance abuse issue, because if you come upon a scene and you're dealing with one individual that has the same symptomology, then you're dealing with those symptoms, and that should be the same in all regard. There should be a policy and procedure in regards to dealing with those symptoms. It doesn't matter what they're coming from.
Absolutely.
And that's just training.
Now, here's the thing, and it almost sounds like we just jumped on you there, Jerry, and we don't really want to. In fact,
no, that's fine.
Sorry, Jerry.
No, not at all.
Your knowledge of policing policy is vital in this type of thing, and and your support for victims who have suffered police brutality goes unquestioned, which is why I count you as a friend, and I've requested that you join us as co-host as often as you possibly can on this show. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Summers will become my new co-host on this particular show. That's the position that we've agreed on. So you'll be hearing a lot more from Jerry Summers on this show as often as he's available. So we thank him for that in advance.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, that's nothing personal, Jerry, from me. I just you're wonderful, actually. I've talked to you before. So
Stephanie, there's no need to apologize. I understand the emotion that's involved, and I see both sides, and I try to keep a balanced approach on both sides. The problem is police officers are making it harder and harder to defend, and they're not policing themselves very well, and the institution and the industry and the profession is not policing itself very well, and there's a lot of things that they could be doing better that they're not, and they're choosing not to do so, and that is extremely frustrating for me. The worst thing somebody can do in a mental health issue is to escalate the problem. And
right,
you're
but
right.
That's exactly what they do, and if they had more training, well, basically.
There is a time management problem. You're right. There is a time management that does not excuse executing somebody. It just doesn't excuse
Absolutely
it.
not.
Right.
And here's the thing.
All the time you need to de-escalate it. You get the people that can, one of the things you'll see often in a hostage negotiation situation is if a person has barricaded themselves, they're going to get somebody that person knows and trusts to talk to them. Now, they're not going to allow that to go in. Well, they in highly publicized areas, that tends to happen more. But yeah, you're right. You hope, and they're not going to let that person go in and put themselves in harm, but they'll certainly talk to the individual. And more often than not, it takes a long time. But I've sat on cases where we've been outside homes where people have had firearms in the house, and we've spent 4 or 5 hours or 12 hours talking to them until they finally get tired enough, or they have the right
Calm
person
down or whatever. Yeah.
that they put the guns down and they come outside. Yeah. Or they pass out, or they go to sleep, and then when you go in, you get them secured. But there are ways of handling it. These are not easy cases at any time.
Well, they're not, but I think that'd be a lot easier if police had more training. So Jerry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess the average amount of training is about 120 days of training for a cop, and it takes over a year to get your license to cut hair. So for me, I think at the risk and everything, I mean, if the pay grade has to reflect a higher education, then I believe that it's worth it if it saves lives. But if we don't get in there and do something, our chief of police just suggested that they cut the training time in half because they don't have enough people that want to become in the hiring pool. They don't have enough people who want to become police, and that's.
Do you know?
That's why. So.
Before we quickly move on, I just want to highlight a point that Stephanie just made that our listeners will find absolutely ironic. It would take 12 months to get a license to cut hair, and yet you can be a police officer waving a gun in somebody's face in 120 days.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, or 90 here in Eugene now. 90.
Well, it depends on the state, and it depends on whether you're in an academy that you can't leave, a closed academy or an open academy, on the length of time. But you're right. The majority of police academies range anywhere from 600 hours to 1,200 hours in order to graduate.
So we are here today to talk about the life of Captain Brian Babb. And Stephanie agreed to do this show because she wanted to talk about his life and how he came to lose it at the hands of what appears again to be trigger-happy police officers who are not compassionate enough or trained enough, well enough, to be able to deal with somebody who was suffering from a mental health related issue. And in this journey that she's been on, she's encountered different groups, different organizations, and different families that have struggled and suffered with like-minded issues, that they've also lost their loved ones. And it's very rare that we get this on the show where somebody will sidestep their own issue and be talking about other people's, which is what you've done for the first 40 minutes of this show, Stephanie. But we want to get down to what happened with Captain Brian Babb, an Army veteran who fought for his country, was out there in Afghanistan, and who apparently looks like he's been absolutely ill-treated by law enforcement in his own state, in his own home.
It's not even a treatment. It was a death sentence.
Yeah.
So there's no, you have to be allowed to be treated.
Tell us a little bit about Brian before he went out to Afghanistan. What was he like as a brother, a younger brother, or whether he was, I'm not sure.
He's an older brother.
He's your older brother.
He's my older brother.
He's your big bro.
Yeah, Brian was hilarious, but he was dynamic. He had a lot of energy, really funny, very much a leader in the things that he did. Gotta come up with stories, but Brian in high school used to rodeo. We came from a real horse family. And part of our growing up was being very familiar. My dad was a Marine, and my stepdad did 2 tours in Vietnam. So we come from a military background, and we have a lot of respect for that. And my brother is, the only son of my mother and father. There's my older sister, Rhonda, And so Brian was in the middle of us two girls. And we were kind of in a unique position because here in Eugene, there's a construction company called Delta Sand and Gravel. And that was my dad's, that started by my grandfather. And we were one of the first pioneers in the Willamette Valley. So our family history goes way back. And my brother, okay, so I say that to qualify the fact that my brother was arrogant, but he had a right to be arrogant. He was funny about it. Good looking guy too, if you look at the pictures. Oh, while I'm saying this, while I'm talking, if anybody wants to like reference anything, you can Google Register Guard, Eugene, Oregon with Brian Babb. And there's a lot of articles and a lot of things if anybody's interested. But yeah, Brian wanted to serve his country. He was married and had 2 kids. He went to the National Guard and wanted to go back to school, which he did at Oregon State University. He did the tour in Afghanistan. I think one of the hardest things that he did was he responded to Katrina. And it's kind of the general consensus in our family that was more emotionally damaging to him than both tours in Afghanistan. After 9/11, he went back and did another tour for the country. He felt it was necessary. And that right there describes who my brother was. He was the guy that responded. He was the guy. Oh, here's a good story. Okay, so I actually have this on video. I'll put it on the website. My brother was hunting down on the property, and this man put rocks in his pockets, and my brother saw him jump over the bank and into the water in the middle of winter, and my brother dove in after him and saved this man. And it's on, I have the clips from the news, and that was my brother. That was Brian. He'd be the first one to come to your rescue.
He sounds like an amazing man, but somewhere along the line.
Well, don't get me wrong. He can be a jerk sometimes.
No, we get all of that. We can all be jerks. I love my older brother dearly, and I'll always love my older brother dearly. But I can remember times when we were kids. He was a real jerk. Really got on my nerves. But I'll always love him.
Society, yeah.
And he's my brother, and he's my jerk, right? But
yeah, exactly.
I, we get all of that. But here's the thing. Brian sounds like he was strong, supportive, heroic, loving, caring, considerate, compassionate, understanding. Have I already said that? If I haven't said it, sounds like all these things. But somewhere along the line, something went wrong. Was there a time when you guys, anybody in the family, sensed a change in either his behavior, his attitude, or just the atmosphere and environment around him?
Oh, well, we knew. Absolutely. He was on 100% disability for PTSD and traumatic brain injury. When he was serving, a translator was blown up right next to him, and he received shrapnel in the back of his head and his neck. So he struggled with that, and
so let's just. I just want to define that, because I think the audience they need to understand not just the type of man that he was, but I had a conversation with somebody this morning, I think it was, and their idea of mental health or psychosis was somebody who did it to themselves through drugs or alcohol, right?
Oh, well, you know what? You brought up a really, really good point, and you're right about the definition of that, because I always try to stay away from the terminology mental illness, because that's what we think of. We think of like, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or something where it's not going to go away, where I like to see it as more transitory. And that's why I say mental distress, like emotional distress is a better way for me, because it's not, although it's a constant, it ebbs and flows in regards to its severity, and that has direct correlation to the triggers as well.
But irrespective of that, it's commonly known as a mental illness. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is your brother, Captain Brian Babb, right, did not self-inflict this. His state of well-being was impacted by a life-threatening incident that took place while he was serving his country. That's the point I want to make.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. He had it really hard. Yeah.
So it wasn't that he was, smoking crack in the shed or drinking bottle after bottle of vodka or whiskey.
God, no.
He had a life-threatening experience where something blew up by the side of him, affected his brain, caused some damage, which had a lifetime effect on him, life-changing effect on him. Right?
Completely. Yeah.
Okay. And what you're saying to us here, and this is what I want the audience to get an understanding of, was that the definitive turning point in his state of mental health and well-being?
I think so. And I think it progresses over time too, but it definitely it was so hard for him. He didn't have a visible disability, but he'd go into the VA and he'd see people with limbs missing and burned. And he'd feel bad that he was going in there, but you couldn't, because it's an invisible disability. And he was smart enough to know, like, he would try to write, he had his business, and he was having such a hard time functioning because his brain wouldn't work the way it used to. And my brother was very smart. And so he would try to keep track of things. And he would get so frustrated because he couldn't, he was aware of his limitations, and that was debilitating.
Let me just fire something across to Jerry a minute. Surely that's something that through policing, law enforcement would have experienced time and time again with an officer injured either in an accident, a shooting, vehicle overturning, or something or the other, where an officer who was a thriving, career-minded officer with a good, quick-thinking mentality all of a sudden starts going through a bit of a struggle because he's experienced something, he's witnessed something, he's gone through something that he's found difficult to come out the other side of. Surely as a chief, or even somebody that has a history of knowledge of policing in America, even in your own state, is that something that you've witnessed yourself with other officers, for example?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Unfortunately, law enforcement is not terribly supportive of if an officer gets injured in the line of duty, let's say they get shot, the support is immense. But if it's a traffic crash or something like that, and you start experiencing problems, law enforcement is very good about taking care of its own until you're no longer able to be an officer, and then you're just a civilian and you're no longer part of the family.
Oh, that's a good
and it's pretty cruel about that. I have a very good friend of mine that has experienced he served a community for 28 years. He retired 6.5 years ago, and now the community has accused him of some wrongdoing that I know for a fact he's perfectly innocent of, yet he's got to go through the process of defending himself, and that's just wrong.
So the mentality is, while they're still part of the thin blue line, right, all forms of compassion and understanding and resources, right, are made available to them, irrespective of what their state of mental health is and the way that they're coping or not coping with it. But the moment they're no longer part of that thin blue line family, then they're just treated the same as everybody else. Is that what you're saying, Jerry?
Pretty much.
Well, isn't it kind of hard even working? My sister's a flight nurse, and they see stuff, and then cops go through this, I can't even imagine, on a daily basis. But one of the things that happens is when they go to get any kind of help, if they're experiencing any kind of trauma from what they've seen, it goes on their record, and then it's actually used against them later on. So it it deters you from going and getting the help that they probably need.
That depends on the agency. For instance, I required our officers, whenever there was a traumatic incident, I required them to go to counseling for a minimum of 3 sessions and get cleared in order to come back to work. And that was unusual. They hated me for that. But in the long run, I think we maintained healthier officers in doing that. And once they realized that it was not a challenge to their ability or their mental stability, that this was just a way of teaching them to work through a very difficult situation. For instance, we had one where a coworker was killed in a traffic crash, and it affected many officers on the thing. And the 2 responders that responded, the first 3 on the scene, it was a tragic incident, and I required them all to go to counseling. And they didn't like it, but when they came back, months later, even a year later, they thanked me for doing that. And it became a situation, it was a culture within the organization where that is not anything to demonstrate mental weakness. It's just something we do to take care of our own.
Yeah.
Now,
well,
not
I'm
all
going to thank you
organizations
for that.
do that.
Yeah, I think
not all organizations do that. Yeah. And you're right, there are some organizations where that is a stigma, and they seek not to do it. But the very thing you're trying to accomplish with veterans, Stephanie, dealing with veterans that because they understand one another, is the same thing police officers have attempted to do for a long time. If you're a cop and you've been a cop, you understand what I'm going through, and I'll talk to you. If you're not a cop, I don't want to talk to you. You just don't understand. And but
the unfortunate thing is at the minute it sounds like a very unfair balance where a cop can go through something that's so similar and identical to an individual Joey out there on the street, but he will be handled, managed, taken care of differently just because he's a cop. And yet somebody who, like Captain Brian Babb, who fought for his country, went out and served his country, has an identical trauma, right? Because his trauma was impacted upon him while he was serving his country, which to me is as great an accolade, if not a greater accolade, than the one of just serving your community.
I'm gonna beg to differ a little bit, simply because if you're in the military, you don't get to go home at night, whereas cops do. Yeah. And so I think they have it's a lot more accessible for them to get help, whereas veterans, it's different from.
No, I agree with you 100%. I wasn't trying to compare it and say it was the same. My thing is that the difference in the way that people are treated and the stigma. We just mentioned the stigma. Both yourself and Jerry talked about that stigma. How we see mental health, how we look at people that are struggling or suffering or being impacted with a mental health related issue. The whole reasoning that we have as to how people manage to find themselves in a poor state of mental health. All of these things are the things that needs to be educated on a better level that gives people an understanding that not everybody that has a mental health related issue has impacted themselves with it through taking drugs or alcohol, because that's still the majority of people's thinking when they can think about somebody who's struggling with a mental health related issue, is that person has brought it upon
even if they did though. But here's the thing: is if you're mentally, if you're struggling with some kind of mental health issue, and you are, a lot of that goes hand in hand with drug and alcohol abuse, and they're trying to self-medicate. So personally, I don't think it's that far of a reach to, just kind of.
No, we get all that, and quite often those people that are struggling with mental health often go on to take some form of Class A drug or alcohol to suppress or to extend whatever it is the feelings that they struggle to cope with, because we already know that alcohol and drugs are both depressants. Right?
So they had my brother on 32 different medications.
So they suppress you, they suppress your emotions, they suppress your feelings, and there are a variety of reasons why people who are going through mental health and taking different types of medication would also reach out and dabble with street drugs as well. We're aware of that, but the issue is still the issue. And the core issue, right, is the mental health. That's what that's what they're suffering with. That's what they're struggling with. That's what's directed them into, brought them into this place and put them onto that radar. Now, before we lose track of what we're really trying to accomplish here today, we're talking about Captain Brian Babb, who was a captain in his country's army, who went out to Afghanistan and went out on two tours or more, and was affected with a mental health issue because he had an explosion go off that caused damage to his brain and was going to affect him for the rest of his life anyway. Now, can we go on to that fateful day, that he lost his life, and can we talk about what you know, what you can remember about that day, what information that's available as to what was going on that day prior, A, to the police being called, and B, him losing his life.
So I'm more familiar. I hadn't seen my brother for a little while, so I know what was going on up to that point. But so do you want me to? Because I know there was a lot going on.
Let's take it
so
back.
I'd rather just kind of focus on what happened that day.
But whichever way you want to take it from. But if you could give us a little bit of a background, that would give us an understanding as to why we ended up in that climax on that day.
Well, the background was my brother just struggling. Oh, I got you. I got where you're going with this. Okay. So my brother had been struggling with this, with the PTSD and TBI, and it was getting worse. And like I said, he had his own business that he couldn't run anymore. He had a fishing boat. So, it was two young kids. Well, they weren't young. They're in high school. One was in college. And he was struggling with that. So he went into rehab, the VA rehab. And they'd had him on chronic pain medication that he took occasionally to help with his neck. So they took him off everything. And his words were, it was like being stripped like a live wire, like his nerves, he had nothing to fall back on. And but at the time he died, the VA was prescribing him up to 32 medications. And how that works, I don't know. I guess if you get prescribed something, that's supposed to fix it. But anyway, my brother was trying to get it together because it just wasn't getting better. So at that time, he was still seeing and he'd been regularly seeing his VA therapist for a long time, So he crossed all his T's, he dotted all his I's, did everything he was supposed to as a veteran to get help. And then the end result was this. And that day, my brother called. He was having some flashbacks and having a really hard time coping with them. And he called his VA therapist, and he was on the phone with her, and he'd relayed to her that he had shot off a gun. Now, we understand that it was probably, we think it was like a week. His girlfriend said it had happened weeks beforehand, and that Becky Higgins, his therapist, had misunderstood, but he was trying to describe that he had shot off a gun because he had to hear the impact. It was something about reliving it, and I guess that's what PTSD does. Anyway, so that message, that information, when his therapist called the police that day to do a well check on him, it was miscommunicated, and there was a shift change with the 911 operators. So a lot of information, it was really mixed up. So, but the bottom line is she called to have a well check done. So we had two cruisers pull up to my brother's house and knock on the door. And my brother's still on the phone with his therapist, and he doesn't want to talk to anybody, and he tells him so. So the police respond by calling in a SWAT team, and they bring in a Bearcat and snipers. So my brother's on a panhandle lot, so his neighbors are literally in front of him. And so now you have two snipers, or a sniper on each one of his neighbors' roof, looking directly at his front door. They got on a bullhorn and kept saying, Brian Babb, come out with your hands up. And I'm bypassing. It's really crazy because so much happened in such a short amount of time. My brother's roommate came out and said he's really upset. So my brother, like I said, he kept coming to the door. He'd say, get the fuck off my property, and he'd slam it. And he's still on the phone with his therapist. He had an appointment for the next day. So there's varying reports in regards to like what the neighbors heard and saw, what the witnesses witnessed, and what the police said happened. But the gist of it, the bottom line is they brought in a SWAT team, and within 45 minutes of the call being made to do a well check, my brother lay dead in his doorway. And so he wasn't given any time. He was given no regard. It was almost like he was a problem they needed to fix. And instead of even trying to fix it, they just got rid of it.
You said that his roommates left, and I'm really sorry. I can hear you upset at the moment. So take a breather if you need
That's all
to.
right. No, no, we're good.
I heard you say that his roommate came out shortly after the SWAT team arrived. When the roommates,
correct,
and I'm sure you've probably had time to speak to the roommate since all of this happened, because if he was a roommate, he must have been friends with your brother. But did the roommate ever give an indication as to whether or not he felt threatened by your brother at the time while your brother was behaving the way he was? Or...
No, he didn't feel threatened at all. He is, in fact, he's a veteran, and he is having a very, very difficult time dealing with this because he just keeps saying, I wish I would have stayed in there. If I just stayed there and said, Brian, come, and grabbed him away from the door or anything, he'd still be alive. But
do we know why he left then? Do we know why he left? Was it because...
Well, they're yelling over the bullhorn. They're yelling, come out with your hands up. And so Jim's like, okay, Brian, here I go. And I mean, they talked. They're right by the front door. And Jim's like, hey, Brian, I'm heading out. This is getting a little serious for me. So this is what I'm going to go do. And Brian's like, okay, still on the phone with this therapist. And so Jim went out there and they asked him, what was going on. Jim said, hey, he's really upset. So, that would be a clue to me personally. I mean, first of all, if you're dealing with a veteran on 100% disability and PTSD, I mean, you don't bring in a SWAT team. That's pretty simple to me. Or if you do, you hold back if you think he's actually a danger to others. So, and then we come back to that same questions. If they thought he was suicidal and a danger to himself, then why do you point a gun at somebody who wants to kill themselves? I don't get it, as long as they're not a danger to anybody else. And so
let's just bring Jerry in a minute, because I just want to ask Jerry this question. So Jerry, this roommate comes out, and the SWAT team and whoever's in control of the situation on the outside has had an opportunity to hear from the only person that was in the room or in the house while this situation began to escalate to the point where the SWAT team were called in, or assistance was required. And this guy comes out and he doesn't exhibit any fear. He doesn't give the impression that he was at risk or that it came close at any point. But he expresses that this guy inside is pretty angry, right? And he's annoyed about something. At that point, the control of that particular scene, now you've got first-hand information that this guy is not causing or about to cause harm to anyone else, because this guy has left his company, and he hasn't stopped him. He hasn't tried to stop him from leaving. That could have been a hostage hold for him, a banker, so to speak, to keep the police at bay if he wanted to, or if he wanted to start taking lives.
I didn't think about that.
Right?
Yeah.
So at that point, should not the whole setup have changed?
Yes. The short and here's the issue. When the roommate came out of the house, the scene commander, whoever the scene commander was, and that would have been the ranking officer at the time, should have debriefed that roommate and should have found out a couple things. One, he should have found out that Brian was in the house by himself, that he was upset, but he was on the phone with his counselor, DA counselor, and that would have, I believe if I were faced with those circumstances, I would back the SWAT team back. I would not take them out, but I'd have them staged back a ways. There was no threat to anybody else other than Brian himself at that point. And he was obviously upset with the presence of police on his property. They could have backed back. They could have even left snipers up on the roof where he wouldn't have seen them, and back up and de-escalated that. And I don't think they did. And by continuing to stay on the bullhorn and continuing to demand that he do certain things, even though they already knew or they should have known that he was on the phone with his counselor. They should have. They should have gotten a hold.
Can I just step in a second here, Jerry? Sure. They would have known that he was on the phone to his counselor simply because the counselor used another phone to phone them, right? While she was still on the phone to him. So surely what they should have done was asked her to make her way there, because her being there might have had a greater impact of ending this in a peaceful manner than her being as far away as she was.
She asked. She actually asked to be there.
I disagree with that. I would have asked him to stay. I would have asked the counselor to stay on the phone and stay in contact with him.
No, that's fine. But that was on a mobile. She could have carried on with the mobile because she'd call 911 on the landline, on the house phone, right? So she's on the phone with him on the mobile. She's called 911 on the landline. She could have carried on her travels, made her way towards him, kept in contact with him, keeping him calm all the time she was on her way there. And within minutes, she would have been there physically to be able to go in, and that would have been somebody that he trusted.
Well,
go on, sorry.
Here's the reasoning. Here's the reasoning that the DA gave me. The DA said that because Brian was a veteran and he had access to weapons, that they couldn't allow anybody in there. There's a local group around here. It's called Cahoots, an organization that deals with mental health issues, and they were there. They had heard it over the scanner. They were called, and they weren't allowing anybody to approach my brother's house because of that. And that's why I want the veterans. That's why I want the first responders.
I get that. But I'm quite sure her on the end of a bullhorn to a sergeant of a SWAT team would have been more impacting.
Other than
right.
Anybody.
So getting her there. And being at close hand in order to give him someone that he can trust as a go-to person should have been the primary move.
My Aunt Marlis was right there. She heard about it. The neighbors called her. She had shown up. My Aunt Marlis was right down the street. She's the one who let us know, because my neighbors who knew our family called my aunt and said, "Hey, something's going on with your nephew," and she went right over there. So there were all kinds of alternatives that they could have addressed.
Well, let me address that a little bit, because your DA was correct. The law enforcement response to something like this would not have allowed somebody to go into that house. Especially after the roommate's out, what you've got is somebody who's upset, who has PTSD, who has access to weapons, but Kerben, you're absolutely right. The counselor could have come to the scene and stayed back in a safe distance and worked with the scene commander to de-escalate the issue. And the best thing they could have done is gotten rid of the stupid bullhorn, and they had landline contact with him. They should have continued to use that.
Jerry, I have a question. What if they'd had somebody from Cahoots who is trained in de-escalation address him on the bullhorn? They can't do that.
Well, they can address him on the bullhorn or on the phone. Absolutely, they could do that. They're not going to put somebody who's a civilian in harm's way, and their primary concern is he had access to firearms, and they didn't want them in a situation where he could just start sniping people. Not that saying that he would, but that's a concern.
Well, that's what they said. They were concerned. Yeah.
Right. That's a concern, and
Not
that's a valid law enforcement.
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen, but yeah,
So,
that's what they decided. Yeah.
The problem is they had his counselor on the phone with him, and she was getting somewhere. He at least trusted her, and to continue allowing her to talk and de-escalate, and even work with the scene commander, where basically, because what we've got him isolated. The only person he's going to harm at this point in that house is himself. Yeah. And now, if he tends to open fire out into the community, that's a different story. That's why you have to tactically be set for that situation. But that's not the situation you had. He was alone. He was on the phone, and he was talking to his counselor.
And
so he was getting
the
the mental
911 operator. Yeah, the 911 operator told her to get off. She offered to go there. She offered to stay on the phone. I've listened to the 911 tapes. And the 911 operator is very, very clear that she needs to get off the phone now. And at that time, they were having a shift change as well. So some of the information got confused between the two. So they're responding to the police on scene, and different information were coming in. And so
here's a quick question. I need to come and fire in quick. And first, I'll ask you, Stephanie, and then I'll ask you, Jerry, the very same question. Well, not the same question, but I just want a response from Jerry on this after I've spoken to Steph. What, if any, explanation was given to you as to why it was necessary for the counsellor to be removed from that phone call?
I don't think we were given an explanation, to be honest.
So, Jerry, what point, what was being served? What point was being served by removing the one person that could communicate with him with trust? What would be the point in removing her from that equation so insistently?
That's a tactical mistake. That's a bad mistake that they made. I wouldn't have done that. The concept, I think, is what they were getting at, is they asked her to de-escalate or get off the phone because they were not able to talk to him. They were not able to get any communication going with him. And by getting him off the phone, then the hostage negotiator or the negotiator or the scene commander could be the one talking to him. However, you have a trained counselor who has this individual's trust talking to him. You never, ever get rid of that, especially since there's nobody else in the home. With Brian, you allow that person to work because they've got an established trust. And you can work side by side with the counselor and the scene commander. The scene commander can tell the counselor what they need him to do, and she can work towards getting that done. I think that was a poor decision on whose ever part it was to get her to disconnect.
The unfortunate thing is we can't prosecute them for making bad decisions. But so how long after the counsellor getting off the phone, Miss Higgins or Mrs. Higgins getting off the phone, did things start to go badly wrong?
Almost immediately. It was still going on. I mean, this literally happened within a 45-minute time period. So they were called, they responded, and then they brought in the SWAT team, and then they shot him within 45 minutes. I mean, it's insane. It's so crazy to me to think about that. So
I can tell you about people who were killed within minutes of police arriving on the scene. Tamir Rice, John Crawford, just to name a few, who died within minutes of police arriving on the scene, and they were unarmed.
It's crazy.
Sorry, carry on, Stephanie.
Right. Well, okay, so if we want to go back to the story, I mean, they shot him. And
let's take that back a minute, because it's not a case of just that they shot him, right? So Will Stutzman, or Stutzman, whichever way he wants to be pronouncing it,
Stutzman,
right? Stutzman, right? Shot him, and what they're saying is, and what he's saying is, that Captain Brian Babb had pointed a high-powered scoped hunting rifle at him. Now, is this the only officer that made a statement saying that your brother had aimed a weapon at him?
Actually, Will Stutzman had just gone through his SWAT training, and he was getting off work, and he was inside the station doing paperwork when he heard about this. And so he decided that this would be a good opportunity for him to get some experience in the field. And so he went with the call. So he's in the Bearcat, and he's there. The neighbors, thank God, took pictures. I have a picture of him with his head outside the Bearcat, outside of my brother's house. He's behind 2 6-foot fences and a tree, but he's real close because the way it was set up, this Panhandle lot. And he had sunglasses on, and there's a 2.5-foot steel turret lid that's lifted up between my brother and Will Stutzman. I mean, we're talking about a Bearcat. Will Stutzman even said that he didn't know, he felt like he was in danger because he didn't know that he didn't know whether the Bearcat was actually bulletproof or not. So they had the snipers on the roof, and then the snipers have relayed that they have testified to the fact that they couldn't see anything, and they don't remember if he had a gun, which I think is interesting. Snipers, by definition, are supposed to be the ones that are watching. So Will Stutzman said that my brother raised a rifle at him. So herein lies the issue. So we get the newspapers, and we have pictures of this rifle on the front page, and Brian's holding a gun. So there's a problem with this, though, because the only person that says they saw a gun was Will Stutzman, and that's the man who killed my brother. But there's more to it. So I got all the DVD evidence. We had rallies, we did everything, and I got it, and it was all encrypted. It took me a month and like 3 computer experts to even decode them in order to watch them. But what's really interesting is all the dash cams, the body cams, anything. They didn't have a lot back then, but the ones that are supposed to be in the Bearcat malfunctioned 4 minutes before to 6 minutes after my brother was shot. So not only that, is the gun itself, one of the officers admit to moving the gun to arrange it, to set it down, to get an evidence photo. So no fingerprints were taken, no pictures of the gun where it would have fallen. There were plenty. They left my brother lay there for 6 hours, uncovered in the doorway. But they couldn't take a picture of where the gun allegedly fell after he had raised it to point at somebody. So, there were so many things that they had done wrong. The next day, my sister's in the, they haul him off. They do what they've got to do. And my sister's in the room that's adjacent to the foyer, and it's by his office, and she looks up at the wall and says to her husband, Rocky, what is that? The bullet that had gone through my brother was still lodged in the wall. They didn't even look. Their explanation again was that they thought that the bullet had stayed in my brother's head. Well, I've seen the photos, and I'm telling you that there is absolutely no way that you would think that bullet was still in his head. It was very clear that something had gone all the way through. But they just, my sense is, my feeling is they really didn't care. They knew they weren't going to be held accountable. And so what's the point of gathering evidence? It's not criminal. If it's deemed justified, it's not even a criminal case. So they're not looking for criminal evidence, because if a cop has shot somebody, it's assumed that it's legal. It's assumed that it was have to be. So they don't gather evidence for that. And therein lies a huge issue. Part of our problem we have with law enforcement today is, and that's part of what I want to do, is start helping families, because right after that, you know, I went to the newspapers. I called the DA. I called Chief Kearns, Chief of Police Pete Kearns. I called Mark Gisner. And I mean, they assigned me my own liaison, a sergeant, because I kept asking, where's this? What'd you do? Why'd you do this? What happens now? I had no idea. Well, guess what? They don't really do anything because they don't expect you're going to ask.
Here's another insight. There's two things that I want to throw out there. And both you and Jerry can have a look at this and respond to it. Firstly, right, with all the SWAT members and police that was there and possible neighbors, first question to you, Steph, is was there any pictures whatsoever of your brother pointing a gun at anyone or anywhere?
No.
Okay. And secondly,
none.
Would it have not been highly unlikely that he would have been able to, had he been allowed to stay on the call with his counselor, been able to handle and manage a high-powered rifle with one hand while he held the phone with the other? So wouldn't
it's not only unlikely.
Wouldn't it have been? Wouldn't the best call, if he was believed to have been in possession of a high-powered weapon, was to have made sure that he didn't have the ability to set himself in a position where he could concentrate on using that weapon in a fatal way. And I kind of throw that one to you, Jerry, and the first one to Steph. So let's get you in on it.
The answer is yes. I mean, I don't have any answer for why they got the counselor off the phone with him. I just have none. The other issue without other officers seeing a weapon is of concern, and the biggest issue is you never move anything in a scene until it's appropriately documented, measured, and photographed in its place. You just don't do that because you don't know what you have. And Stephanie's correct in that the officers automatically assume that it was a good shoot when it may not have been. And if it had not been a good shoot, and based on just the one photograph I've seen in the paper, I've talked to Stephanie about it, I have some serious concerns about it. But if it had not been a good shoot, then it is a criminal case, and it's a criminal case against the officer who pulled the trigger.
And for me, one of the, I mean, I know you asked the question, Jerry, but I'm looking at the picture now, and if he was aiming a high-powered rifle at a law enforcement officer who felt it was absolutely necessary for him to fire off a round or some rounds of bullets to take him out, surely there'd have been blood splatter or something around the weapon, or even there just doesn't seem to be any.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
If he had the rifle up, and I'm assuming your brother was right-handed, but it doesn't matter because what the newspaper said is that he aimed the weapon at another officer, and Stutzman, whatever it is, fired around, and it went into the left cheek of your brother and out through his neck.
Correct.
And so first of all, there's no reason why they wouldn't have recovered or measured it to get the trajectory of the bullet in his house that your sister-in-law found. The second thing is that, I'm sorry, if you're holding the gun up in a aiming position and a bullet enters into your left cheek, I mean, it's right there. You're going to have blood spatter on that gun. And if it's not there, that's a major concern.
Because the gun looks clean.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
It does, yeah.
Now,
it does.
The picture that we're looking at, is that's outside the house, right?
Yes, that's on his.
He
was literally standing in the doorway. So here's, and I don't know if you guys want to get onto this yet, but they actually hid witnesses from us that we just recently found. That debate what the narrative of what the police even say happened. I just, the cover up, I just honestly, I mean, at the beginning of this conversation, we were all talking about, you know, police and before we got Jerry on and what I believed police, did I have any feelings about him one way or another beforehand? And like I said, I you know, police are who you call if you need something and don't get caught speeding. But after this happened, I have awoke to the fact that blue line is very much real. They actually protect each other. So even if something is really true, there's this mentality that they're going to protect these people. And Will Stutzman, I think he got buck fever. I think he saw the little red, he pulled, you know, they were there. I think he wasn't mindful enough. Obviously they weren't taking time. I think the whole situation was so escalated and charged that you know, part of it was them saying, you know, my brother's a veteran, he was a sharpshooter, he could get up on the second floor and shoot, which wasn't happening because he kept coming to the front door, and all of this in such a short period of time when, again, they could have just backed off for just a little while, you know, and just give it a little bit of time. But then to go and cover up and lie, I'm just shattered. My trust is shattered. You know, who do you go to now, you know, for help? Who do you go to if the police are going to lie, if you're in danger of the police? Where do you go?
Do you know, we've come across many people over the 4 years that I've been doing this show, who had no negative relationships with law enforcement. Antoinette Houston comes to mind, a woman who actually dated a police officer, and she always felt that she's a black woman who didn't believe in the Black Lives Matter movement. She just thought it was unreal and somebody was making it up somewhere. She had where she lived, she had never witnessed this police brutality that she'd heard about in the news or read in the paper. She had never seen it. On a fateful day when she was returning from a funeral in support of because she was a dance teacher, but one of her pupils' father had died, and she'd been invited to support this pupil at the funeral, which was hundreds of miles away. On her way home, she encountered an off-duty police officer that caused so much damage to her. I mean, over $60,000 worth of surgery that she had to have.
Oh my God.
On her shoulder, where he ripped the soldier out, shoulder, ripped the ligaments and the muscle and the tissue, etc., scarred her and almost disabled her for life. In front, and the officer, in all the time the officer was doing this, the officer was totally unaware that she had a 9-year-old child asleep on the back seat of her vehicle.
Oh no.
Now, this was a woman who had no knowledge of bad policing, didn't have a view or you know, an idea that that's what went on. In fact, was very dismissive of some of the stories that she heard from other places. But yet that experience was to change her viewpoints and her life forever. Is that similar with you now, Stephanie?
That's completely it. And that's the story of a black woman. And here, you know, black lives do matter. And then when you hear the statistics and everything else, it's insane, because if it can happen to my brother, the middle-aged, middle-class white guy in his own home, a veteran, it can happen to anybody.
Do you know, I'll tell you what struck me when I first encountered you, Stephanie. You said this. I just need to find it. My family was one of the first pioneers of the Willamette Valley, My great-grandfather was a judge here, and his picture hangs in the Pioneer Museum. My father is a businessman well known in the area. If they can kill my brother, they can kill anyone. That's a massive statement. And so we're not just, and again, yes, as a person of color myself, I'm very aware of how racism stands and etc. But this is not about racism anymore. This is just about bad policing, full stop. Right. And yes, I agree that people of color are being treated a very terrible way, but police are just behaving in a very bad way. And when I love Jerry Summers because Jerry is so true and straight, and I regard him and I treat him as a friend because that's what I see him as a friend. But Jerry,
well, if we'd had more people like him on the force or chiefs, we probably wouldn't be in this position.
Absolutely. But Jerry, how does that make you feel when someone like Stephanie can talk about her father being a judge and her father being a well-positioned businessman, and how her brother's life could be taken this way, all of a sudden, anyone's game. That's the reality of what she's trying to say here, right?
It is, and it's absolutely disgusting, and it is a reality of what's going on day in and day out. And it stems from 50 plus years of self-policing and absolutely no accountability to the general public because there's no transparency. And once you have a legal system where the judges don't hold the prosecutors accountable, the prosecutors don't hold the police officers accountable, the administration or the police officers accountable, you have a systemic failure. And that's what we're seeing right now. And
good word for it.
And the only way I can see this being resolved is, one, the people who do stand up within the organization. I mean, I tried to change law enforcement, and the end result was I wound up getting fired for holding a high level official accountable to the same laws that the citizens held. And I don't have any bitterness over that. I knew I was going to get fired, and I knew that was a hill I was willing to die on because it's an ethical hill. And ultimately, that's what happened. Unfortunately, with my case, it was just a career killing, if you will. It was not my human or my body. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there like Captain Babb and others that have not been as lucky as I have.
Let's rewind and take it back again, because I think it's very important that we really unravel as much of this as we can in this particular area where Mr. Stutzman claims that Captain Brian Babb was pointing a weapon at him, and so therefore that qualifies him to be able to state that he was in fear of his life, which is why he opened fire. And you made the point, Jerry. What worries you is that out of all of those, and Stephanie said at the beginning, there was a big response to this thing. It wasn't just one or a couple of officers that came. They had a full SWAT team out there with other officers as well. So the fact that only William Stutzman, only he, out of everybody that was there, claims to have seen Captain Babb with a weapon hoisted, pointing in his direction or in any direction, for that matter. Because even if he was just pointing the gun, it didn't have to be at William Stutzman. He could have just been pointing the gun, and that could have justified a shoot, right? But he's claiming that he pointed it at him, but yet nobody else, irrespective of who the claim was he was pointing at, claims to have seen Captain Babb pointing a weapon. Stephanie,
right.
So you said that you had witnesses that was held back from you. Are you there, Stephanie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, witnesses that was held back from you that you only found out about afterwards, who conflict and contradict the statements of the law enforcement. Could you just expand on that for us, please?
Sure. So first of all, like I said, they did not investigate it criminally. Jerry knows more about this than I do, obviously, but standard procedure would depict that they go and talk to neighbors and stuff, which I believe they did initially. And one of the people they spoke to had a little studio apartment that shared a fence with my brother's front yard. And like I said, it was on a panhandle lot, if you can see. So everything is really close in. He's close to his neighbors, but away from the road. So what happened was we went, and because we knew the neighbors, they were friends of my brother's and stuff, we went and got their statements, and they sent us screenshots of the texting they were texting each other as it was happening, what their experience was. And of course, the police never got any of that. And then when they did go back, because of course I said I did, and we had a rally, and I said, we had talked to neighbors and stuff, and then they went back, and we got copies of what the police had said, the neighbor said, and they didn't even match. So they're not even reporting correctly once they got the right story. But this one particular person, I was going, and this is 3 years later, and I'm going through notes of mine about Brian's case, and I found a Post-it note, and it had my brother's neighbor's name on it, and it said he wasn't holding a gun in quotation marks. And I thought, what the hell? I don't remember seeing this guy's name in any of the many reports I've gone over, the IDFIT or anything else. So it took me a little while, but I got a hold of him. I found him, and I thought maybe he didn't want to have anything to do with it, just because it is what it is, the nature of it. But I was wrong. So what I found out is, when I did get a hold of this guy, he was so grateful to talk to somebody. And what I didn't know was he had been trying to tell his story, and the police dismissed him, and he kept saying, no, this is what happened. I know what happened. And he said they wouldn't listen. And so he tried calling the police station. Nobody would listen. So when I did get a hold of him, he said, well, I already testified, or I already did my deposition. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. We don't have any of that. So I went back over all our papers, and there was nothing in there from him. And it turns out that, well, and he said that he thought he was doing that for our team, my nephew and my niece's lawyers. And he was taken. There were 6 people in a room. He was sworn in. There was a court recorder. He spent hours going over his testimony. We never heard anything. We didn't have a copy of it. Our attorney wasn't there. There was nothing. We ended up finding a copy of this, and it was for the city of Eugene had brought him in, and it was stuck in the transcriber's office. If I had that whole 62 pages of testimony from the man who claims that he, was witness to what really happened, and it was gone. It was in the transcriber's office, is where we found it. And if I hadn't found that Post-it note, it wouldn't have been brought up. And this was literally a few months ago. And we've been doing this for over 3 years. So it's I can't emphasize enough that when people think they know what happened, to look again. Look at it from every point of view that you can. Try on different scenarios. What if he didn't have a gun? What if he did have a gun? What if there was somebody else in that? Think about all the different scenarios that this one situation can ensue, and then exhaust those, and research and look at them all. And that's how we found this guy. And what he said happened is completely different from what the police say happened. He said he'd heard my brother shut the door. He was right there. He could, he knew what was going on, and that Brian had literally opened the door because he felt the rumbling of the Bearcat, and So there was no way my brother would have been able to. He literally opened the door to see what was going on because he felt the vibration of the Bearcat on his property, and that's when he was shot. And so, and here's another thing, that the snipers, like I said, they said they couldn't remember anything, and they were asked, one guy was asked, do you remember how you got on the roof? And he didn't remember. And he was asked, did you find a ladder? Did you climb up on a wood pile? And he doesn't remember. But that same that same sniper had killed a man 5 years earlier, and he remembers every single detail of that day, as he has reported. Also, he's been caught lying on cases before, and I don't know what they do. They don't really do much. I think they erase Jerry might know this, but after 2 years, I heard they erase any disciplinary actions or anything a cop might get while on duty. But they're creating this whole scenario of confusion and vagueness, and so nobody can get, and then take away the fact that there's no video, there's no specific evidence about the gun. It just makes it difficult. They just made it impossible instead of just saying, hey, this is what happened.
Here's the thing, right? Police Chief Pete Kearns says, while assessing the situation with a crisis negotiator, Bab allegedly came to the front door with a rifle. To me, that needs to be definitive. Did he or did he not come to the door with a rifle? You can't say, as a police chief, he allegedly came to the front door with a rifle, because at that point in time, you cannot justify a kill if you don't know whether or not he came to the door with a rifle. Right? He goes on to say, Mr. Bab aimed. So first of all, he says he allegedly came to the front door with a rifle. And in the very next sentence, he says he aimed or pointed a rifle at the officer, and the officer responded by shooting on Mr. Bab. Right? He goes on to say there's something else that he says that I sort of found quite interesting. That his roommate safely got out after police arrived in an armored vehicle, which insinuates that the roommate was in danger. And only on the arrival of the armored vehicle did the roommate make a safe escape. That's what it insinuates.
Oh, I never caught that.
In the press, right? So his roommate safely got out after police arrived in an armored vehicle, right?
Wow.
So that insinuates, that gives the impression that Captain Brian Bab was erratic, dangerous.
I never even read it that way.
Right?
Yeah, I never thought of that because I knew that wasn't the case. So it never even occurred to me to read it with that in it. But hearing you say that, that's exactly what it sounds like. Okay,
so for me, there's 3 key points just in those 2 paragraphs. Right? He's saying that the roommate safely got out after the armored car. Right? Then he's saying that he allegedly came to the front door with a rifle, which is not definitive. Did he or did he not? And thirdly, he then follows that on with the next sentence by saying he aimed or pointed the rifle at an officer. And yet, no other officer has claimed to have seen your brother raise or point a weapon. So how is this Chief Kearns making such a bold statement, almost as a matter of fact?
Because they didn't expect anybody to question it. That's why. The DA actually stepped down from his appointed office 2 months after my brother was killed. So we held a rally. We had, a lot of attention. Like I said, I've got a huge family, and it made the news. And it was so glaringly obvious of the mistakes that they'd made. And they weren't just mistakes, it was negligent, But to answer that other question is, police shoot people unarmed all the time. It wasn't even a question of whether he had a gun or not, but it was, why were they even there? Why were they responding to him with a SWAT team. You know, so it really shouldn't even be a question as to whether he had a gun or not.
Let me just try and clarify, and maybe Jerry can jump in and support or challenge if I'm wrong. I believe, and I believe rightly so, the police responded because the call came from a trained counsellor who was raising an alarm because she felt that there was a situation at hand, right? So getting the necessary support there to make sure that residents in the locality were safe, I don't think was the wrong call. I think the wrong call was once they've got there, how they handled it and how they eliminated or ignored the one resourceful tool that they had, which was the counsellor that was on that phone. That's where it started to go absolutely wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry.
No, you're absolutely right. To answer your question with regard to the chief's statement, when was that article? How long after that shooting did that article come out? Because what I can see happening is the chief not having the internal affairs investigation completed yet. He should have never said he pointed a gun. He should have said he allegedly came to the door with a weapon. He allegedly pointed the gun, and that's currently under investigation. If that was done after the investigation was done, then he needed to make an absolute statement. But my concern is exactly what you have. The one, they painted Captain Babb as somebody who was obviously, they painted him in the corner of being unstable and dangerous. Part of that would have come from the counselor saying he had fired a round inside the home, but that automatically de-escalated when the roommate left the house, because the roommate told him there was nobody else in the home.
But because the roommate safely got out after the police arrived in an armored vehicle, suggests that it was the armored vehicle and the police arriving that got him to safety.
Absolutely, and that's not appropriate, but yes, that's absolutely what it suggests.
And that article, for your information, was posted on the 1st of April in 2015.
Yeah, Brian was killed March 30th.
Okay.
So that's yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
The allegedly is just the chief not knowing all the facts at that point. But then it should have been allegedly pointing the gun at a police officer as well.
Yeah. That's where a lot of the confusion starts, doesn't it? Because all of a sudden,
it does.
Before anybody who has got nothing to do with this, before they even have a chance to start forming an opinion, here it is. He pointed and aimed a rifle at an officer. Well, no, I'm not surprised he got shot. Then it's going to be
right, exactly.
You know, and then all of a sudden, even if his roommate was scared, if his roommate was at risk, then this guy was pretty dangerous. Then wasn't he? Right.
Yep.
That's how
they made it sound like.
That's what it's going to read like to somebody who doesn't know him or who's totally unaware of the situation. Right. That's what it's going to read like.
Correct.
And so therefore, you're already preparing. You're already preparing a defense for that shooting. Mm-hmm. You're already preparing a justification for the kill. You're already preparing the minds of those that might be dubious and doubtful. You're already preparing their minds to be made up that this was a good shoot.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what chances, the Stephanie Babbs of this world have in trying to clear her family member's name and get the truth out there when this is the type of thing that's being reported out there and people are believing? Because these are the words that are being attributed to the police chief, Pete Kearns.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes it worse is that the Stephanie Babbs and the family victims that are behind do not have access to all the information, because the police will say it's under investigation and we're not going to release it to you.
And here's the thing. If you actually haven't seen some of these articles that are going out there, if you haven't read them all and seen how people are actually being portrayed, victims are being portrayed, then you're not even in a position to defend it. You've got hundreds and thousands of people already making up their mind.
Okay, so I got kind of lucky on that point, and I know one of the things that they tell families, don't talk to the media, don't talk to the police. That's the obvious one. But I I got to know, I didn't expect there to be this much interest. And when it did hit us and they started, you know, trying to get our attention, to get our statements and everything else, I was so overwhelmed with planning the memorial and the shock my family was going through. I kind of, I had our whole family just not say anything and give us a moment. And we had a reporter, Christian Hill, call me and approach me, and I said, look, here, we'll talk, I'll get my whole family together, but this is how it's going to be. And I kind of made a deal with him and used information as currency regarding this story and getting our statements, getting an exclusive, if you will. So I wanted to know when any stories were going to come out, and that way I'd be able to let my mom know. And that way if she went to the news, went and picked up her newspaper in the morning, she wasn't shocked to see her only son's face on, you know, the front page. And in that way, he was wonderful about that. And he was really an investigative reporter. So, and then I got the whole family together at Brian's house, and then he showed up and we all answered questions together, which made a difference, I think, rather than, you know, one person said this or that. And that way we were also represented as a united front. And the way I got so much of this information as well is there were enough people who were sympathetic and shocked that this had happened. There was one crew from, there's only a couple of news stations here and they kind of all work together, but there was a weekend crew, a cameraman and a reporter, and I got to know them. And when I needed something like the DVD evidence, I'd call them up and say, hey, this is what's going on. And they'd say, okay, we have 30 seconds. Can you meet us in 15 minutes and we'll be able to record you? And I would be there every single time. And then they would just kind of give it a little blip in the evening. And I just kept doing that, you know, to get this information. And we'd have, like I said, we had the rallies in the courthouse. We had the family members. We did the march. We did all these things to keep it up front, you know, to keep it relevant. And because we were in shock, you know, there's no way I was going to let my brother just fade away, because he lived his life largely. So in a way, it's poetic justice that he left this way, but there has to be something done, because there's so many families that this is happening to, and they don't have resources. They don't have support. They don't know what to do or who to call or how to get information, you know, because they lock it down. You know, they just lock everything down.
Do you know, the thing is, and we're about 8 minutes away from the end of the show, and it's amazing how quickly the time has flown. It's been a lot of information here, and I think we've really opened this one up better than I could have ever imagined when we first embarked on it. But here you have Captain Brian Babb, who in many eyes would have been a hero, who served 2 tours fighting for his country, serving his country, was impacted by a life-threatening, changing incident, an explosion which caused him severe mental damage and brain damage as his brain was penetrated, and then went on to suffer trauma, PTSD, which was to impact him even further. And that's only part of the story, because that's just what happened to him because of what happened while he was out there serving his country. But the state of his well-being and the way that his mental health impacted him, to then be, and I, excuse me as I say this, because shooting him dead is only part of the problem. The greatest tragedy to me is the way that they've tried to almost criminalize him and take away from his family that memory of the hero that went out and served their country, and turned him into some kind of chaotic, crazy thug who was likely to kill his roommate or anybody else that stood in his way if he was in a
that's
bad
exactly
mood.
what they did. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Jerry, surely when we look at the way that this has been recorded, when we look at the way that it's been reported, when we look at the way that the statements have been made, and the absence of statements from many other officers who were there who did not see the same thing as the one officer who opened fire and killed him, surely there are so many questions to answer here that another investigation needs to be done on this investigation.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I mean, I only looked at a very small portion of something for about 20 minutes and came up with some major problems. And just this discussion has led to way more questions than anybody can imagine.
And alongside some of the things that we've already raised, is there anything else that you picked up on, Jerry, that you spotted that we might not have addressed yet?
The absence of blood spatter on the rifle that's in the photo is huge. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that one could look at and determine whether what they're saying. The fact that they didn't recover the round, that your sister-in-law, I believe that you said, Stephanie, found in
My sister, my older sister.
yeah, your sister found in Brian's home. That's a trajectory issue completely.
Yeah.
And why would they not recover that? Why would they not measure it? Why would they not do all the crime scene or whether it's a crime scene or not? The police were not treating it as a crime scene. Anytime there's a death, you treat it as a crime scene and you document it as a crime scene. And if you come on a call where there's a unattended death, you treat it as a homicide until the evidence rules that out, and you document everything. You get one shot at a scene, and you do it correctly, because to endure the public scrutiny and endure the ridicule for not doing it right should be grounds for them to making sure they did it right. There's statements, there's things that they were hiding, the deposition that nobody knew of. It goes from the police department to the prosecutor, and they're defending their attorneys. All of that's a Brady violation. That's hiding exculpatory evidence is a Brady violation, and you can find that under Brady versus State of Maryland Supreme Court rulings on them.
Look, very quickly, we're gonna run out of time. What was you going to say there, Stephanie? Go on.
Well, I wanted to go ahead, if that's okay, to mention the GoFundMe.
Yes,
I need
please.
the
That's what I was
filing
gonna-
fee.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. If you wanted to go ahead, I'm doing Brian's Advocacy Brigade for Victims and Veterans, and I put up a GoFundMe for BABVV. I need the filing money. I've got us all set up, but that is going to help this organization help other families and veterans that need help. So that I put that out there.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm going to be inviting you to we do these round tables every now and again, and Jerry is part of that, Yolanda McNair and Jonathan Newton, and we have a few others who are part of this round table that we do every few weeks or so. We've done 2 so far, and we're going to be doing another one very soon, I'm quite sure. But I'd like to be inviting you, as far as the mental health area is concerned, onto that particular show, because I want to revisit this story, because there's so much more to dig out of it. It's very touching, it's very real, and I think that we've really pulled a lot out of this today. I'm quite satisfied that this is going to be an audience listening to this right now are going to be pretty concerned as to how the police were allowed to get away with killing this gentleman and making it out to be that he was some sort of a rogue gunman about to kill a SWAT team member, etc., and all the rest that went with it. But we are at the end of this transmission, I'm afraid. Is there anything else that you'd just like to add before we go, Stephanie?
I just want to really to give you thanks for being able to get out there and put that out there, and for the families who have lost loved ones to police violence. It's not about what they did, it's about what the police aren't doing.
Thank you very much. And Jerry, my new co-host, who will be a regular guest on this show. Anything you'd like to add, Jerry?
No, I don't believe so. We covered a lot of ground, and thank you very much. And I'm honored to be part of this.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank once again Jerry Summers, author and former Idaho Chief of Police, and Stephanie Babb, sister and advocate for Captain Brian Babb. This is the end of the show for today. We're out of here. God bless.
Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month.
Reggae dancehall by the beach.
At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
Use them, it's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like Malcolm.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the...
Just a quick one. Remember that next Saturday night we've got Coach Jason.
Where human life is concerned. Surely,
wrongly convicted,
realize that lives actually matter.
Exonerated, set free, live next Saturday right here on Issues Today, World Jam Global Radio. That's it for now. We're out of here.
24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're my World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.